He called at 9:17 a.m., right during the quarterly review meeting. "We're getting a divorce, and we're selling the company." "To whom?" I asked, my eyes still tracing the growth metrics on the screen. "A new investor," he said. I heard a faint, sickeningly familiar laugh on his end of the line. My stepsister. What they didn't know was that the best part of their plan was that it had always been mine. My name is Sloan Whitaker. I am 32 years old, and I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Thorne & Wilder Goods, a company I built from a sketch on a coffee shop napkin into a multi-million-dollar enterprise headquartered here in the quiet, unassuming town of Rivingale. My job is to make things work. I manage the silent, intricate dance of logistics, the unglamorous ballet of supply chains, the cold, hard mathematics of operational efficiency. I am the architect of the machine that runs beneath the polished brand my husband, Gavin Wilder, presents to the world. The phone sat in the center of the polished mahogany boardroom table, a sleek black rectangle of glass and steel. Its speakerphone light pulsed a calm, steady blue, a tiny synthetic heartbeat in the cathedral-like silence of the room. My entire executive team was present, their eyes fixed on the quarterly logistics report projected onto the wall, a tapestry of data and growth charts that I had personally woven. They were my people, a team I had handpicked for their precision and their loyalty. The blue light was the only thing that felt out of place, an unwelcome intrusion into our sanctuary of numbers. Gavin's voice emerged from it, stripped of all warmth, as clinical as if he were reading an earnings disclaimer. "We're getting a divorce, and we're selling the company." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I saw my head of distribution, Marcus, flinch, his pen freezing mid-note. I saw our CFO, Elias Vance, a man who had weathered 2 market crashes without blinking, subtly lower his gaze to the table. I, however, did not move. My focus remained on a logistics efficiency graph showing a 7.8% improvement in last-mile delivery times, a number I was proud of. "To whom?" I asked. My voice was even, betraying nothing. It was the same tone I used to query a shipping manifest discrepancy. "A new investor," Gavin said. The words clipped. He was always impatient with details he considered beneath him. "They're offering a lifeline. The deal needs to close this afternoon. We have a cash flow crisis. Sloan, you know this." I did know about the cash flow. I also knew it was a temporary, manageable dip caused by an aggressive Q4 inventory buildup he had insisted upon, against my counsel. It was a problem. But it wasn't a crisis. It was an excuse. And then, through the faint static of the connection, I heard it. It was a sound so quiet, it was almost subliminal. A tiny sliver of audio that pierced through the professional facade. A high, breathy laugh, quickly suppressed. It was the sound of glass cracking. It was the sound of my stepsister, Harper Vale. Harper, the girl who once, at a family dinner, had smiled sweetly at me and told her friends I was a walking calculator. A compliment she delivered like an insult. The girl whose entire contribution to the company, during a brief marketing internship, was a proposal to fake online engagement. The air in the room had become unbreathable. The silence was no longer respectful. It was horrified. My team was looking at me, their faces a mixture of pity and alarm, waiting for me to shatter. But I was built of stronger material than that. I reached forward, my hand steady, and pressed the red icon on the phone's screen, severing the connection. The blue light died. I lifted my head and met the eyes of my team. "We'll postpone the remainder of the review," I said, my voice calm, measured. The captain steadying the ship in a sudden squall. "I need 30 minutes. Please hold all external communications until you hear from me." They nodded, their professionalism a shield against the personal drama that had just exploded in their laps. They gathered their papers and filed out of the room in a silence that was more profound than before. Elias Vance, the CFO, was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, a man whose loyalty was measured in spreadsheets and SEC filings. "Sloan," he whispered, his voice raspy. "The purchasing entity, the name on the preliminary offer sheet Gavin sent over this morning, is Alderpoint Acquisition." I nodded, my expression unreadable. "Thank you, Elias." He closed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the glass-walled room. Suspended 18 floors above Rivingale, Alderpoint Acquisition. The name was bland, corporate, designed to be forgotten. But it sparked a memory, cold and sharp. 2 weeks ago, Harper had stopped by my office, a rare occurrence. She was all bright smiles and feigned admiration for my workload. Her perfume, an expensive, cloying scent called oxblood peony, filling my minimalist space. She'd placed a single form on my desk. "Just a new blanket policy for shipping insurance. Slow," she'd said, her voice casual. "The logistics guys said you needed to sign off. Something about covering high-value pallets." She'd tapped a blank line with a perfectly manicured fingernail. I was in the middle of negotiating a complex freight contract, and distracted. I'd scrawled my signature. A simple, harmless authorization. A single stroke of a pen. Now, sitting in the echoing silence of the boardroom, I opened my laptop. The sleek aluminum was cool beneath my fingertips. I bypassed the standard employee portal, the dashboards and analytics that everyone else saw. My credentials took me deeper, into the system's core architecture, into the software I had designed from the ground up, the operational brain of Thorne and Wilder Goods. It was called Nimbus Gate. It was our proprietary supply chain and inventory management system, a fortress of data that tracked every single item we sold. From the moment raw materials arrived at our suppliers to the final scan at a customer's doorstep, it was my creation. And within it, I had built myself a throne room, a level of administrative access so absolute that not even Gavin knew its full capabilities. He saw the polished user interface. I controlled the source code. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a series of commands. I wasn't looking for Alderpoint Acquisition in our financial records. That was the front door. I was going in through the basement. I ran a diagnostic on all fulfillment orders originating in the last 3 weeks, filtering for any anomalies, any orders that deviated from established routing protocols by more than 0.5%. The system processed the query in seconds. A single red line of data appeared on my screen, a bleeding wound in a sea of green. It was a string of high-volume, high-frequency orders for our most expensive product line. They were being processed, paid for by a corporate account, and routed to a new, recently activated distribution node, a fulfillment warehouse located on the outskirts of a place called Hallow Creek. I cross-referenced the address with our master logistics database, then with state and federal commercial zoning maps. My blood ran cold, but not with fear. It was the cold of absolute certainty. Hallow Creek was a ghost. The address did not exist. The warehouse was a fiction, a digital phantom created to receive phantom orders, artificially inflating our expenditures and draining our cash reserves. It was a cleverly constructed illusion designed to create the very cash flow crisis Gavin had used as his justification. It was financial sabotage, elegant in its simplicity. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly in the quiet room. The entire scheme unfolded in my mind, a beautiful, terrible piece of machinery. Harper's faked shipping insurance form wasn't for insurance. It was a forged authorization, buried in legalese, giving her the power to create a new, unverified shipping destination within the system, a backdoor she thought I would never find. The ghost orders would create a paper trail of financial distress, giving Gavin the leverage to force a fire sale to a shell company, Alderpoint, which was undoubtedly controlled by Harper. They would buy the company for pennies on the dollar, using its own manipulated finances as the reason for its low valuation. They would divorce me, oust me, and take everything. It was a sharp plan, a vicious plan, a plan built on the assumption that I was just a walking calculator, someone who saw the numbers but never the knife hidden behind them. A slow smile spread across my face, a humorless, razor-thin line. It was a good knife, well designed, perfectly aimed. But they had made one catastrophic, fatal error. They had brought a weapon into a fight without knowing who had forged the steel. They were trying to stab me with a blade I had already sharpened myself. The 30 minutes I gave my team were a gift, not to them, but to myself. A measured parcel of time to allow the initial shock to curdle into cold, clear strategy. The ghost warehouse at Hallow Creek wasn't just a discovery. It was a confirmation. The final piece of data I needed to validate a hypothesis I had been quietly nursing for years. Our marriage, much like our company, had started as a beautiful prospectus full of promise. But I had long since learned that the real story is never in the marketing material. It's in the fine print of the capitalization table. I remember the wedding. Of course I do. It was a masterpiece of optics, staged in the glass-walled conservatory at Glenmere Hall. Sunlight streamed through the panes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, glittering diamonds. White roses, thousands of them, climbed the steel beams, their scent mingling with the expensive perfumes of our guests, a curated collection of angel investors, industry bloggers, and Gavin's family. My family was conspicuously absent, save for one. My father had passed years ago, and my mother's recent marriage had brought with it a new, ambitious daughter. Gavin stood before me, his eyes shining with what I, and everyone else, mistook for adoration. He was handsome, charismatic, the perfect front man. He was the thorn, the sharp, appealing face of the brand. I was the wilder, the unseen, foundational strength. He promised me a lifetime partnership, his voice resonating with sincerity, perfectly pitched to reassure the investors in the front row that their seed money was safe with this devoted, stable power couple. It was a flawless performance. Harper had stood beside me as my maid of honor, her hand squeezing mine. Her dress was a pale, silvery gray that shimmered under the glass roof. "You're my right brain, Sloane," she'd whispered, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Then her eyes had drifted past me to Gavin, and the look on her face was not one of sisterly affection. It was the naked, hungry gaze of a day trader watching a stock ticker climb vertically. A look of pure, acquisitive desire. I registered it, filed it away, but did not act on it. In marriage, as in business, you do not act on a single data point. You wait for a trend. The initial capitalization table for Thorne and Wilder Goods was a document of beautiful, deceptive simplicity. It reflected the pretty marriage, Gavin Wilder, 50% equity, Sloane Whitaker, 50% equity. A small percentage was carved out for an employee stock option pool and a handful of key advisors. It was a partnership of equals, a narrative Gavin loved to tell. He was the vision, I was the execution. Together, we were whole. It was a lie. Of course, vision is worthless without execution. An idea is just a fleeting electrical impulse in the brain until someone builds the infrastructure to make it real. I built the infrastructure. A year into the marriage, long before the first cracks began to show, I made my first move. It was a quiet, unglamorous piece of legal maneuvering. I established a blind trust. I called it the Whitaker-Rook Trust, a name deliberately chosen for its bland, financial dryness. It sounded like a retirement fund, something you'd see in an estate plan. No one paid it any attention. Into this trust, I didn't place stock. I placed something far more valuable, the intellectual property. I filed the patents for our proprietary logistics software, Nimbus Gate, and our revolutionary cold chain packing process. Cold Skein. Under the ownership of the trust, not Thorne and Wilder Goods, the company was granted an exclusive, but revocable, license to use them. It was a simple firewall, a legal distinction so subtle that even our corporate attorneys barely glanced at it. Gavin certainly didn't. He hated paperwork. He signed whatever I put in front of him, his mind already on the next magazine interview. The rook, in chess, is a powerful piece that moves in straight, unambiguous lines. It protects the king, but it can also lay siege to the entire board. The trend I had been waiting for began to emerge. Harper, having graduated, was brought into the company. Her ideas were all flash, no substance. She constantly pushed for aggressive marketing tactics. She wanted to hire virtual influencers, CGI personalities we could control completely. She proposed creating decoy orders, shipping empty boxes to fake addresses to inflate our sales numbers and impress investors. She wanted to hire PR firms that specialized in astroturfing, paying people to leave positive reviews and comments. I vetoed every single proposal. "We are not building a company on lies, Harper," I told her, my voice flat, in a marketing meeting. "Growth that isn't real is just a debt you'll have to pay back later." I focused on what was real. I secured contracts with boutique retailers in underserved markets. I negotiated a pilot program to supply our healthy snack products to 3 school districts. It was slow, unsexy, methodical work. It was profitable, sustainable, and real. Gavin grew bored. He loved the explosive growth of the early days, the thrill of the launch. The patient, steady work of building a lasting enterprise felt like a slog to him. He started taking coffee meetings, then lunch meetings, then late afternoon drinks at Finchline, a dark, expensive lounge downtown where venture capitalists went to poach talent and fund implausible dreams. He met with growth investors, he told me, people who got his vision for rapid, disruptive scaling. He logged every one of these meetings in our shared digital calendar. He was meticulous about his schedule, but not about his privacy settings. He never marked them as private. I saw every entry. Coffee with Apex Ventures. Lunch, Brim and Hallow. 4 p.m. drinks at Finchline, Wetter A. Vale. A. Vale. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was a typo for a client. The second time, I cross-referenced it with Harper's full name, Harper Annalise Vale. The pieces began to click into place, forming a cold, sharp-edged picture. My husband and my stepsister were meeting with investors behind my back. They weren't just planning a new strategy, they were planning a new company, one that didn't include me. Our marriage had become a public performance. At industry events, we were the perfect couple, finishing each other's sentences, a testament to partnership. At home, our sprawling, minimalist house grew quiet, the silence broken only by the tap of my keyboard late into the night. The wedding photos on the mantelpiece showed 2 smiling strangers. The real marriage wasn't in those silver frames. It was in the prenuptial agreement I had insisted upon, a document Gavin's lawyer had dismissed as overly cautious. It was in the dense, labyrinthine clauses of the Whitaker-Rook Trust. It was in the silent, accumulating weight of the data points I collected every day. They thought love was about trust and faith. They thought a partnership was about shared dreams and public promises. But in the landscape of their betrayal, I had come to understand a different kind of devotion. My loyalty wasn't to a man, but to the truth of the numbers. My affection wasn't expressed in kisses, but in contingency plans. The beautiful marriage was a shell corporation for a relationship that had long been insolvent. The ugly cap table, with its hidden clauses, its trusts and its tripwires, was the only thing that was real. It was the only thing I could depend on. I learned to love through auditing. The silence of the boardroom was my laboratory now. The ghost warehouse at Hallow Creek was the anomaly, the unexpected result that demanded investigation. My mind, trained to deconstruct complex systems and find points of failure, shifted from operations to forensics. Gavin and Harper had started a fire, believing I would only see the smoke. They were wrong. I could trace the spark back to the match. My first query was simple: a public record search for Alderpoint Acquisition, LLC. The digital paperwork materialized on my screen in seconds. It was a freshly minted entity, filed just 3 months prior in the city of Northbridge, a place known for its discreet corporate registration services. It was clean, anonymous, a shell designed to be empty. But every shell has a crack. I found it at the bottom of the Articles of Organization, on the line designated for the authorized signatory. The signature was a fluid, confident scrawl. The printed name beneath it, A. Vale. Not Harper, just A. Vale. The arrogance was breathtaking. She had used her own initials, confident that the thin veil of a single letter would be enough to obscure her identity. It was a child's idea of a disguise. Next, I turned my attention inward, to our own financial ledgers. If Alderpoint was the designated buyer, they would need to appear legitimate, to have some history, however fabricated. I ran a search for all new vendor payments processed in the last 90 days. Most were familiar names: suppliers, freight carriers, marketing agencies. But one stood out: a series of 3 substantial payments to a firm called Easton Line Media. I had never heard of them. I pulled the invoices. They were for digital brand strategy consulting and social media engagement services, billed directly to Thorne & Wilder. But the purchase orders had been approved under a project code I didn't recognize, authorized by a junior marketing manager who reported directly to Harper. The invoices themselves were professionally designed, but the contact information was the tell. The account manager was listed as H. Vale. The contact email was havale@eastonline.net. It was a flimsy firewall, a transparent attempt to build a paper trail suggesting Alderpoint had been paying for services, making it look like an active, functioning business. In reality, Thorne & Wilder was paying a company that likely didn't exist to create a fake history for the shell company that was about to acquire it. It was a circular, self-funding act of fraud. The digital trail was clear, but I needed something physical, something tangible. I remembered the red flag in Nimbus Gate, the ghost orders. While the Hallow Creek address was a phantom, the orders had to originate from a real terminal, and the system logged the physical return of any undeliverable packages. I pulled the exception reports from our main Rivingale distribution center. There it was. A single pallet, part of the Hallow Creek consignment, had been mislabeled and returned to sender 2 days ago. I clicked open the attached quality control report, filed by a diligent floor supervisor. The report was standard procedure. Crate ID 88 Kilo Charlie, destination Hallow Creek Annex, status returned, address not found. But then, in the comments section, the supervisor had added a personal, sensory note. Note: interior packaging appears to have been opened and resealed. Strong perfume scent detected from contents. Smells like flowers, peonies maybe. Oxblood peony. Harper's signature scent. It was overpowering. A scent she used to announce her presence before she even entered a room. The image was vivid, immediate. Harper, in some anonymous office space, physically opening one of our product boxes, perhaps to show an item to a potential co-conspirator. Her perfume clinging to the cardboard and packing material, leaving an olfactory fingerprint. She had physically touched the evidence. With that connection made, I dove back into Nimbus Gate, my fortress. I ran a deep diagnostic on the Hallow Creek facility's profile. It was more than just a fake address. It was a black hole in my data-perfect universe. It had no assigned OSHA compliance code, a legal necessity for any functioning warehouse. It had no logged check-ins from freight carriers, no security gate records, no employee timestamps. The environmental sensors, which monitor temperature and humidity in all our facilities, showed no data feed. It was a destination that existed only as a line of code, a digital dead end for our money. The final piece of the corporate puzzle was the legal address listed on Alder Point's registration. It was a penthouse apartment in a luxury high-rise in Northbridge. It seemed anonymous enough until I pulled Harper's corporate expense reports for the past year. My breath caught, not in shock, but in a kind of grim admiration for her audacity. There it was, a recurring monthly charge, categorized under long-term corporate housing, for the exact same penthouse apartment. She was using her Thorne and Wilder company card to pay the rent on the headquarters of the company she had created to steal Thorne and Wilder. Now I had the how. I needed to see the what. I called Elias Vance's office. Elias, please send me a secure copy of the Alder Point term sheet. I need to review the fine print. A moment later, the encrypted file appeared in my inbox. I opened the purchase agreement. It was a work of brutalist efficiency. The valuation was criminally low, justified by appendices filled with fabricated logistics costs and the declining cash flow from the Hallow Creek scheme. I scrolled through the legalese, my eyes scanning for the inevitable clauses about management transition. I found it on page 17, section 4B. Upon closing of the transaction, it read, "The remaining co-founder shall tender their resignation from the board and exit the company's day-to-day operations within 30 days." The remaining co-founder. The language was designed to erase me, to render my entire contribution to the company, my years of work, into a contractual footnote. I was to be given a severance package that amounted to a pittance and then be shown the door to the house I had built. There was a schedule attached for the flow of funds, an initial wire transfer, an advance of $300,000, was scheduled to move from our corporate account to Alder Point Acquisitions account at a bank I'd never heard of, Bracken and Moore. It was scheduled for 4:03 p.m. today. The ticking clock was no longer abstract. It had a specific, digital heartbeat. One last thread remained. The plan was too coordinated, too detailed to have been improvised. It had to be documented somewhere. They were arrogant, but they were also meticulous planners. They would have a blueprint. I ran a deep search on our cloud server logs, looking for any unusual cross-platform syncing activity linked to Gavin's or Harper's executive accounts. I found it. A recently disconnected personal Dropbox folder that had briefly synced with Gavin's company-issued laptop 3 weeks ago. The connection had been removed, but a ghost of the file directory remained in the system's cache. There were dozens of files, mostly personal photos and documents, but one folder was titled Project Lavender, an absurdly romantic name for a corporate assassination. Inside, there was a single file, a PowerPoint presentation, the pitch deck. I opened the cached version. The first slide was a picture of our company logo, shattered like glass. The mission statement was written beneath. Phase 2, Unlocking True Growth. The subsequent slides laid out the entire plan in cold, corporate language, leveraging the manufactured cash crisis, executing a leveraged buyout via a special-purpose vehicle, Alder Point, and streamlining leadership for a more agile future. The final slide was the most damning. It contained just one sentence, a handwritten note scanned onto the page, in what I recognized as Harper's looping script. Gavin, the plan is simple: sell fast, divorce clean, split 2 ways. My hands moved with practiced, detached precision. I took a series of high-resolution screenshots of everything: the LLC filing, the fake invoices, the warehouse anomaly report, the penthouse address on the expense report, the purchase agreement, the bank transfer schedule, and every single slide of Project Lavender. I compiled them into a single, password-protected PDF. Then, I ran a command line function, generating a unique SHA-256 hash for the file, a cryptographic fingerprint that would prove it hadn't been altered from this exact moment. I composed a new email. The recipient was Arya Leland, my personal attorney, a woman whose mind was as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. The subject line was simple: urgent, evidence packet. I attached the protected file and the hash key. Arya, I wrote, we have a situation. Review immediately. I will need you in 30 minutes. I hit send. As the email disappeared from my outbox, a cold, clear thought settled over me. As calm and solid as bedrock, they had planned every detail. They had the corporate vehicle, the fake financials, the legal documents. They had leveraged my husband's charm and my stepsister's ambition. They thought they had accounted for everything, but their entire plan rested on the data flowing through the systems I had built. They believed I was just the operator, the woman who knew how to run the warehouse. They forgot who built the data warehouse. The evidence packet was sent. The digital ghost of their conspiracy was now safely in the hands of my attorney, but that file was merely the story of their trap. It was not the story of mine. Theirs was a hastily constructed snare, built in a matter of months with arrogance and greed. Mine was a fortress, designed over years, its foundations laid with paranoia and foresight, its walls built of legal code and software protocols. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea they had been wandering through my killing field all along. A year ago, during a routine system-wide upgrade for Nimbus Gate, I embedded a new covenant into its core administrative protocols. I called it the Technical Founder Keyman Clause. It was buried in pages of technical updates regarding data encryption and server redundancy. Language so dense it would make a lawyer's eyes glaze over. Gavin, as CEO, signed off on the update without reading it. The clause was simple and absolute. In the event of a transfer of controlling interest in the company, not unanimously approved and physically signed by both original co-founders, all administrative access to Nimbus Gate, at every level, would be immediately and irrevocably voided for the new controlling party. The system would effectively brick itself to any new owner who took the company without my consent. Since Thorne and Wilder Goods cannot function for a single hour without its operational brain, the clause rendered any hostile or forced sale completely worthless. The company's body could be sold, but I, the technical founder, held its soul. This was the first layer of my defense. The second was the Whitaker-Rook Trust. When I patented our proprietary cold chain packing process, Cold Skein, I didn't do it under the corporate umbrella of Thorne and Wilder. I filed it as the exclusive intellectual property of the trust. Cold Skein was our single biggest competitive advantage, the reason we could ship perishable goods to climates our competitors couldn't, with a spoilage rate of less than 0.1%. Thorne and Wilder Goods operated under an exclusive license from the trust, a license that contained a termination clause triggered by any material change in executive leadership deemed detrimental to the IP's integrity. A sale to a shell company controlled by my embezzling stepsister would certainly qualify. To buy Thorne and Wilder without my consent was to buy a brand name with its most valuable asset stripped away. The third layer was financial. 6 months ago, I renegotiated our corporate insurance policies. I added a rider to our general liability, an expensive but crucial policy known as Key Operations Insurance. It protected the company from catastrophic disruption caused by the loss or malfeasance of a key executive. Gavin loved it. He saw it as a golden parachute. But I had worked with the underwriters to draft a very specific exclusion clause. The policy would be rendered null and void for any claim arising from a disruptive event in which the benefiting parties were found to be complicit in fraud against the company. It was an elegant piece of corporate jujitsu. The very act of their fraud would vaporize the insurance payout they would be counting on to cover the ensuing operational chaos. These were the passive defenses, the high walls and deep moats I had built around my kingdom. But when Gavin's calendar started filling up with meetings at Finchline, I began to build active countermeasures. I programmed what is known in the world of corporate defense as a poison pill. But mine was not financial. It was digital. I wrote a script within Nimbus Gates' automated auditing system. The script was designed to monitor the ratio of fulfilled orders to undeliverable or phantom returns. I set the threshold at 7%. It was a number high enough to be a clear indicator of systemic fraud, but low enough to be triggered before the financial damage became irreversible. If that threshold was ever breached, the system was programmed to do two things automatically, without any further human intervention. First, it would place an irreversible lock on all inventory transfers to the anomalous destination, in this case, Hallow Creek. Second, it would auto-compile a complete data package, including all relevant invoices, shipping manifests, and user access logs, and transmit it via secure API to the Compliance Division of the Food and Drug Administration, flagging a potential violation of supply chain integrity laws. Their ghost orders were not just draining cash, they were now the ammunition in a gun pointed directly at their heads. Data was not enough. I needed a human source. 3 months ago, our finance department posted an opening for a summer internship. I flagged a resume from the applicant pool. June Merritt, a brilliant auditing student from a state university, hungry, meticulous, and easily overlooked. I pulled her application before the hiring manager ever saw it and contacted her directly. I hired her myself, off-book, as a private contractor. Her official role was a finance intern. Her real job was to be my eyes and ears. She sat at a small desk not 10 feet from the accounts payable team, the very people processing the fraudulent invoices for Easton Line Media. Her task was simple: observe, document, and every evening, upload scanned copies of any suspicious invoices or payment authorizations to a secure server I controlled. She was a ghost in their machine. With my internal surveillance in place, I moved to test the external infrastructure of their lie. 2 weeks ago, I used a proxy server and a prepaid credit card to establish a new, anonymous corporate account with Thorne and Wilder. I became a secret shopper. I placed a series of significant orders, all directed to a rented P.O. box. Then, I would call customer service and, feigning an error, ask for the shipment to be rerouted to a different address, a service address I provided that just happened to be next door to their phantom Hallow Creek warehouse. I would then request a specific, narrow delivery window, 2 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time when no one, not even a skeleton crew, would likely be there if the facility was a sham. The final piece was visual confirmation. Every single one of our fulfillment centers, even third-party logistics partners, is required by our food safety protocols to have live feed security cameras accessible through a dedicated portal in Nimbus Gate. It's a non-negotiable part of our operating agreement, meant for monitoring hygiene and safety compliance. When I created the Hallow Creek node in the system, a necessary step to make it a selectable shipping destination, I linked the camera feed to a public, unmonitored traffic camera overlooking the empty industrial park where the warehouse was supposed to be. At 2:15 p.m., last Tuesday, I logged into the compliance portal. I clicked on the camera feed for Hallow Creek. There was no bustling loading dock, no trucks, no workers. There was only the silent, pixelated image of a corrugated steel roll-up door on a derelict building, covered in graffiti. The door was closed. It was always closed. I recorded the time-stamped feed. This morning, as soon as I hung up on Elias, I had called Aria Leland. "Aria," I'd said, my voice even. "Project Rook is active. I am sending the packet now. Prepare the temporary restraining order and the injunction against Alderpoint. I want all assets frozen pending investigation. The trigger will be a fraudulent wire transfer scheduled for 4:03 p.m. There was no surprise in her voice. We had war-gamed this scenario months ago. It's already drafted. Sloan, she'd replied. Waiting for you to give the word. The trap was now fully set. Every piece was in place. The legal framework, the digital tripwires, the human intelligence, the physical proof. Their plan depended on a single click. The authorization of a wire transfer that would begin the purchase. That click was the pressure plate. It would not only prove their intent to defraud the company, but would simultaneously trigger the poison pill, void the insurance, and give Arya the legal ammunition to file the injunction. They had constructed an elaborate timeline, culminating in their victory at 4:03 p.m. That was their hourglass, the sand trickling down toward their payday. They didn't know that my clock was set 5 minutes earlier. My victory was not dependent on stopping them. It was dependent on letting them take the final, fatal step. 4:03 p.m. was their deadline. 3:58 p.m. was mine. The boardroom was a cage of glass and light, suspended 18 floors above the city. The hard, white afternoon sun struck the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle, projecting a stretched and distorted version of the Thorne and Wilder logo onto the far wall. It looked like a wound. I had been sitting there, perfectly still, for 10 minutes, my back to the door, watching the pedestrians move like ants across the sun-drenched expanse of Rivingale Exchange below. The silence in the room was not peaceful. It was primed. It was the held breath before the plunge. The door opened with a soft, hydraulic hiss. I didn't turn. I watched their reflections swim into view on the window in front of me. Gavin entered first, wearing the smile he reserved for difficult negotiations and television interviews. It was a mask of placid, unassailable calm, a piece of armor he believed was impenetrable. Behind him was Harper. She was a vision in a smoky gray dress that seemed to absorb the light around her. She carried a slim silver briefcase, holding it not like an accessory, but like a weapon. They took their seats on the opposite side of the vast mahogany table, their movements synchronized, rehearsed. "Sloan," Gavin began, his voice smooth as polished stone. Harper cut him off, placing the silver briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive thud. I watched the reflection of the company's logo, our logo, warp across its polished surface. "We have an offer," she said, her voice cool and devoid of any pretense of sisterly affection. "One that will save the company." She opened the briefcase and slid a leather-bound document across the table toward me. It stopped perfectly in the center, an offering on an altar. I finally turned my body to face them, my expression as neutral as the glass surrounding us. I didn't open the document immediately. Instead, I let my gaze rest on Harper, then on Gavin, holding it long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. Harper's composure was flawless, but I could see the faint, rapid pulse in her neck. Gavin's smile remained fixed, but his fingers were drumming a silent, frantic rhythm on his knee beneath the table. "An offer to save it from what, exactly?" I asked, my voice quiet. "From the cash flow crisis you've been overlooking," Gavin said, leaning forward. "From insolvency. Harper has secured a buyer who sees the long-term potential, someone willing to inject the capital we desperately need." "Harper did," I repeated, the statement flat. I finally reached for the document, my fingers tracing the expensive grain of the leather cover before opening it. I didn't read the words. I knew what they said. I simply began to turn the pages. One by one, a slow, deliberate rustle of paper that was the only sound in the room. I let each page fall with a soft finality. At the signature page, I paused. "One signature," I murmured, tracing the blank line reserved for me. 2, for the witnesses. 3, for the buyer. I looked up, meeting Gavin's eyes. 3 signatures to undo 5 years of work. "Just sign it, Sloan," Gavin urged, his voice taking on a tone of strained patience, as if explaining something simple to a child. "It's a generous offer, This is what's best for everyone, for the employees, for the brand, for us. It allows us a clean break. I closed the document. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. I placed my hands flat on the table, my fingers spread. This was the moment, the precipice. I looked from my husband's pleading, false face to my stepsister's smug, triumphant one. They believed they were at the finish line. I tapped 3 times on the polished surface of the table. A quiet, rhythmic beat. Tap, tap, tap. It was a signal. In the adjacent conference room, where my attorney Aria Leland and a forensic accountant were waiting. That was the cue. On the wall behind Gavin and Harper, the 60-inch screen that we used for presentations flickered to life. It had been in standby mode, a dark, reflective mirror. Now, it glowed with a bright, unforgiving light. The first image that appeared was a high-resolution photograph of the Northbridge penthouse, taken from the real estate listing. The address was clearly visible at the bottom of the screen. Beside it, a scanned copy of Harper's corporate expense report, with the matching address and the corporate housing charge highlighted in yellow. Harper's face, which had been a mask of cool confidence, seemed to dissolve. The color drained from it, leaving a pale, waxy sheen. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape. The slide changed. Now it was a screenshot of the Easton Line Media invoices, next to the incorporation documents for Alder Point Acquisition, LLC. The signature of A. Vale was magnified, placed directly beside a sample of Harper's own signature from her employment contract. They were identical. Gavin's smile finally broke. It didn't disappear. It cracked, like cheap porcelain. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to inject authority into his voice, but it came out thin. The screen changed again, a technical schematic of the Nimbus gate system, showing a red, flashing icon over the Hallow Creek location. The words, "No OSHA code," "No carrier logs," "No sensor data," were stamped over it in bold, white letters. Next to it appeared the QC report from the returned pallet. The supervisor's comment about the strong scent of peonies highlighted. Harper visibly flinched, a small, involuntary movement, as if she could smell her own perfume accusing her from the screen. "Sloan, this is ridiculous," Gavin said, forcing a harsh laugh that didn't have a trace of humor in it. "You're taking unrelated data points and trying to build some kind of conspiracy. You're being dramatic." The final slide appeared. It was the title page of their Project Lavender pitch deck, the shattered Thorne and Wilder logo stark against a white background. And then, the last, damning slide, with Harper's handwritten note, "Sell fast, divorce clean, split 2 ways." Her own handwriting filled the screen, a giant, undeniable confession. Harper looked as if she had been turned to stone. Gavin, however, was still trying to fight, to bluff his way out. That's a hypothetical. A strategic exercise. It means nothing. I didn't respond to him. I reached into the slim portfolio beside my chair and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table. It was not a counteroffer. It was a kill shot. "This is not a hypothetical," I said, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. "This is a wire transfer confirmation from Bracken & Moore's correspondent bank, time-stamped this morning. It confirms the scheduling of a $300,000 advance from our operating account, to be transferred at 4:03 p.m. today." I tapped the paper. The beneficiary account is listed as Alder Point Acquisition. The sole signatory on that account, as the bank has verified, is Harper Vale. The last of the color drained from Gavin's face. The bravado, the anger, the condescension, it all evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly face of fear. He looked at Harper, but she was staring at the paper on the table as if it were a snake. The boardroom was silent again, but this time it was the silence of a tomb. I leaned forward, my voice low, precise, and carrying the weight of everything they had done. "You have 60 seconds," I said, my eyes locking onto theirs. 60 seconds to withdraw this offer, rescind the wire transfer, and dissolve Alderpoint acquisition. After that, this ceases to be an internal matter. The 60 seconds I had allotted them stretched into an eternity. The silence in the glass room thick with the weight of their ruin. Gavin, who had built his career on an unshakable foundation of confidence, was the first to crumble. But he didn't break down. He tried to rebuild his lie on a new foundation. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice straining to find its old, authoritative pitch. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Alderpoint. It's a special purpose vehicle. It's backed by Brim and Hallow, the growth fund. Harper was just acting as a local liaison. It's a standard arm's-length transaction to protect their anonymity." It was a good lie, spoken under pressure. Brim and Hallow was a real fund, one he'd met with at Finchline. He was trying to attach his phantom company to a legitimate name, hoping the association would create enough doubt to muddy the waters. I didn't dignify his lie with a verbal response. I simply tapped my laptop, and the image on the screen behind him changed. The Project Lavender deck was replaced by a clean, stark corporate structure chart. It was a simple diagram of boxes and lines, an irrefutable map of his deceit. At the top was a box labeled Harper Annalise Vale, sole proprietor. A single line dropped down to another box, Vale Holdings, LLC. And from that box, a final line connected to the one at the bottom, Alderpoint Acquisition, LLC. "There is no Brim and Hallow," I said, my voice cutting through his sputtering. "There is only Vale Holdings, and there is only Harper. The state of Northbridge corporate registry is quite clear." The chart was a guillotine, severing the head of his final lie in a single, clean drop. Hammer blow number 1. As if on cue, the boardroom door opened again. It wasn't Arya this time. It was a young woman with a sharp, intelligent face and a no-nonsense demeanor they had seen every day for the past 3 months, but had never truly noticed. "This is June Merritt," I said, as the young woman walked silently to the table. "Our finance intern." June said nothing. She simply placed 2 stacks of paper on the polished mahogany. The first was a collection of the invoices from Easton Line Media. The second was a corresponding stack of our own server logs and payment records. Side by side, they showed identical invoice numbers, identical dates, but wildly different service descriptions and payment amounts. One set was for legitimate, minor web hosting fees. The other was the fabricated, hugely inflated billing for digital brand strategy. It was irrefutable evidence of dual bookkeeping and embezzlement. Then, June placed a small tablet on the table and tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was a time-stamped recording from last Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., showing a derelict, graffiti-covered building. A delivery truck from one of our logistics partners pulled up. The driver got out, looked at his manifest, then at the locked, silent building. He shook his head, made a call, and after a few minutes, got back in his truck and drove away. The video was looped, the truck's arrival and departure playing over and over, a silent testament to a warehouse that never was. Hammer blow number 2. I gestured to the screen, which now showed a magnified image of the shipping insurance form Harper had given me, the one with my forged signature. "Elias," I said, my voice carrying to the intercom. "Could you confirm the authenticity of the signature on document 7B? Our CFO's voice came through the speaker, crisp and formal. "I have the original here. I have compared it to your verified signature samples on file. They do not match. The stroke weight, the kerning. It's a competent forgery, but it is unequivocally not your signature. Sloan." Hammer blow number 3. At that moment, a discreet notification pinged on my laptop, an alert visible only to me. It was from the Nimbus Gate automated audit system. The cascade of returned orders from my secret shopper account, combined with the final batch of Phantom Hallow Creek orders processed that morning, had finally pushed the fraud ratio past the 7% threshold. The poison pill had been swallowed. "And there it is," I said, looking from Gavin to Harper. At 3:58 p.m., precisely 2 minutes ago, our logistics system automatically flagged a critical level of shipping fraud. Per federal supply chain integrity protocols, a full data packet, including the Hallow Creek manifests and the Easton Line invoices, has just been securely transmitted to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. I paused, letting the weight of the federal government settle into the room with us. Simultaneously, a notice of fraudulent activity was sent to our key ops insurance carrier, permanently voiding any potential claim related to this transition. Hammer blow number 4. The boardroom door opened for a third time. Aria Leland walked in, followed by 2 of her associates. She was the physical embodiment of the consequences they had sought to avoid. Dressed in a severe black suit, her face impassive, she did not acknowledge Gavin or Harper. She simply addressed the room. "Pursuant to an emergency petition filed this afternoon," Aria began, her voice a cold, legal instrument. "A temporary restraining order has been granted. Alder Point Acquisition, its parent entities, and its principal officer, Harper Vale, are hereby enjoined and restrained from accessing, transferring, or disposing of any and all assets. Furthermore, Thorne and Wilder Goods is ordered to freeze all transactions related to this entity pending a full investigation into wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate sabotage." She placed a thick, ribbon-bound document on the table. It landed with a heavy, final sound. Hammer blow number 5. My personal phone vibrated on the table. A text message from the vice president of our bank, whom Aria had on standby. I turned the screen toward them. The message was simple. "Wire transfer to account. 8766 has been suspended. Account has been flagged and frozen by our internal fraud department pending legal review." The $300,000, their seed money for this new life, was gone, trapped in the very system they had tried to manipulate. Hammer blow number 6. Finally, I picked up the copies of Project Lavender that June had brought in with her. I slid one across to the empty chair representing our advisory board, then another, and another. "This is the complete operational blueprint for the plan," I stated. "As you can see, each page is watermarked with the date and time it was recovered from the server cache. The entire file has been cryptographically sealed with a SHA-256 hash to ensure its integrity as evidence." I pushed the last copy toward the center of the table, toward Gavin and Harper, the final exhibit in the case against them. Hammer blow number 7. I leaned back in my chair and watched them. Harper was motionless, her face a blank mask of shock, her eyes fixed on the restraining order as if it were written in a language she could no longer comprehend. Gavin. I looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the screen behind him. The confident, charismatic man who had charmed investors and promised me a lifetime of partnership was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out stranger, his face pale, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with the dawning, horrific understanding of his own annihilation. For the very first time since I had met him, Gavin Wilder looked completely and utterly lost. The silence returned, heavier and more absolute than before. They had walked in here to finalize a deal, to exit a marriage and a company, to collect their winnings. They had brought a purchase agreement, but they had walked into a deposition. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. "There is no sale," I said, my voice clear and final, echoing in the glass cage. "There is only a referral." The air in the room was thick with the fallout of the 7 hammer blows. The criminal referral was no longer a threat. It was a certainty, a legal machine that had been switched on and could not be turned off. Gavin and Harper were no longer predators cornered. They were specimens pinned to a board, their every fraudulent move documented and displayed. But the dissection was not yet complete. The corporate entities had been addressed. Now, it was time to address the marriage. Arya Leland, my attorney, had remained standing, a silent, formidable presence. At a subtle nod from me, one of her associates stepped forward and placed a final document on the table in front of me. It was not a legal filing or a piece of evidence. It was bound in the same dark blue leather as our marriage certificate. "You may recognize this," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. I pushed the document toward Gavin. "It's our prenuptial agreement." Gavin stared at it, his face a mask of confusion. He had been so thoroughly dismantled on the corporate front that he couldn't comprehend another angle of attack. To him, the divorce was now just a bitter consequence, a personal sting on top of a professional catastrophe. He didn't understand. The divorce was the weapon. "What does this have to do with anything?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Take it all, Sloane. It's over." "Oh, it's not over," I said softly. "We're not done settling the accounts." I opened the document to a page marked with a blue tab. "I'd like to draw your attention to Section 9, Clause C. I believe your own counsel, Mr. Abernathy, flagged it as unconventional at the time of signing." Arya began to read the clause aloud, her voice resonating with the cold, dispassionate authority of the law itself. "The financial malfeasance clause. In the event that one party to this marital agreement is found to have engaged in an act of financial malfeasance against the shared marital estate, the injured party shall have the right to enact a summary transfer of the offending party's entire equity stake in any jointly held business venture." Harper, who had been catatonic, finally looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Gavin just shook his head, lost in the legalese. Arya continued, her tone unchanging. "The transfer of said equity shall be executed for a nominal consideration of $1. For the purposes of this agreement, financial malfeasance is explicitly defined as, but not limited to, any willful and covert action intended to devalue, misappropriate, or fraudulently transfer a shared asset." She paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final, crucial sentence. "This definition specifically includes any attempt to orchestrate the sale of a shared asset to a related party of the injured party's family without the injured party's full knowledge and consent." I let the definition settle. The air in the room grew thin, hard to breathe. I had insisted on that clause. Gavin had laughed at it, calling it my accountant's paranoia. His lawyer had tried to strike it, but I had held firm. It was my one non-negotiable term. "And who," I asked the silent room, "is a related party? The appendix of definitions is quite clear." I flipped to the back of the document. It defines a related party as any individual connected by blood, adoption, or marriage to the immediate family members of Sloane Whitaker. This includes, by name, the children of any new spouse of my mother. I looked directly at Harper, whose face had finally crumpled into a portrait of pure, unadulterated horror. "You, Harper, you are the related party. Your mother's marriage to my father made you my stepsister. This clause was written for you." Arya slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Gavin. "This is the signed affidavit from your attorney, Mr. Abernathy, dated 5 years ago. It confirms that he explained the full and binding implications of Section 9, Clause C to you, and that you acknowledged your understanding of it." His own lawyer had signed his death warrant. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the legal team and the forensic accountant. This was beyond a corporate takeover. This was a complete and total annihilation, executed through a single paragraph they had forgotten was ever written. This clause didn't just give me leverage. It allowed me to unilaterally redraw the cap table, right here, right now. It was a contractual nuke, and I had my finger on the button. This isn't real, Harper stammered, her voice cracking. This is some kind of legal trick. It's the furthest thing from a trick, Arya corrected her coolly. It's a contract your co-conspirator signed willingly. I picked up a pen from the table, its weight feeling solid and real in my hand. This clause requires my signature to be activated, I explained, my voice steady. I positioned the pen over the signature line on a notice of activation that Arya had prepared. The document cited the evidence of Alder Point's ownership and the intent of Project Lavender as the triggering event. Gavin finally understood. The blood drained from his face, leaving it the color of ash. This wasn't just about losing the company to a hostile board or facing federal charges. This was about losing his 50%, his entire stake, his fortune, everything he had built, and everything he had stolen, was about to vanish with the stroke of my pen. He lunged forward in his chair, his hands hitting the table. The calm, collected CEO was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked man. "Sloan, wait, stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "I'll call off the divorce. We can fix this. We don't have to do this." His words were pathetic. He wasn't offering to save our marriage. He was offering to remain married to his money. He saw the divorce not as the end of a relationship, but as the legal mechanism that would allow this clause to be executed. I met his desperate gaze, my own expression unyielding. "Oh, no. Gavin," I said, my voice dropping, each word a chip of ice. "We are in complete agreement on the divorce." I let the statement hang there, a blade between us. It's the assets that are no longer we. And then I signed my name. The ink flowed black and certain onto the page, a single clean line that severed him from his fortune. Arya's associate, a licensed notary public, stepped forward, affixed her seal to the document, and stamped it with a heavy, satisfying thud. The sound echoed in the silent room. "The activation is legally witnessed and effective immediately," Arya announced. Gavin physically slumped back in his chair, as if the strings holding him upright had been cut. He stared at me, his eyes hollow with a devastation so profound it was almost silent. He had lost. He had lost it all. Harper, however, found her voice, a thin, reedy whisper of disbelief. "You can't do this to him," she said, looking at me. "You can't do this to us." I looked at her, my stepsister, the architect of this entire catastrophe, the woman who had laughed at me on the phone that morning. I felt nothing, no anger, no triumph, no pity, just the quiet, cold satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan, of an equation finally solved. I stood up from the table, my work here complete. I just did. The activation of the prenup clause was the final structural demolition of their plan. All that remained was the debris. Harper, however, wasn't ready to be buried in it. As I turned to leave, a raw, animal sound of desperation tore from her throat, and she lunged from her chair, not at me, but toward me, stopping just short of the table. She held up her phone, the screen glowing, her face a frantic, contorted mask of negotiation. "Wait!" she cried, her voice high and thin. "We can undo this. I can dissolve the SPV right now, from my phone. It'll all go away." She brandished the phone like a last-ditch peace offering. "Just call them back. Sloan, retract the report you sent to the FDA. Tell them it was a system error. We can make this go away before it gets out of control." It was the gambler's final, desperate bet, trying to buy back the chips after the house had already taken everything. She still believed this was a negotiation, that there was a deal to be made, a price for my silence. Before I could answer, the boardroom door opened again, this time with a quiet authority. A man in the crisp, dark blue uniform of our building's corporate security detail stepped inside. He was a large man, but his movements were calm and respectful. He did not look at me. His focus was entirely on Harper. "Ms. Vale," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm going to have to ask you to please have a seat. The legal department has instructed us that the injunction is now active." Arya clarified from the doorway. "The temporary restraining order prevents you from accessing, altering, or disposing of any and all company assets, Ms. Vale. That explicitly includes the dissolution of any financial vehicles, like Alderpoint, that have been funded with company money. There is nothing for you to undo. Checkmate." The door she was trying to bargain with had already been locked and bolted from the other side. Panic gave way to a different kind of frantic energy. If she couldn't erase the entity, she would try to erase the evidence. She whirled around, snatched her laptop from the table, and flipped it open. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate clatter in the silent room. She was trying to get into her email, into the company servers, trying to delete the digital breadcrumbs of her conspiracy. But the login screen simply refreshed, the password field blinking expectantly. A small red message appeared beneath it. "Access denied. User credentials revoked." "What did you do?" she shrieked, looking at me, her eyes wild. "I didn't do anything," I replied, my voice level. "Nimbus Gate did. My system is designed to interpret a user account linked to this level of sustained fraudulent activity as a hostile external threat. It responded by purging your credentials and locking you out. To the machine, you no longer exist." Defeated by the digital fortress, she was left sputtering, her last avenue of escape sealed. I walked slowly back to the table, and from my portfolio, I produced another document. It was a few pages stapled together, slightly worn at the edges. I slid it across the mahogany until it rested in front of her. It was her original internship contract from 5 years ago. "You may have forgotten this," I said. "Section 11, the non-compete clause. It precludes you from working for or establishing any competing business in the specialty goods sector for a period of 24 months following your departure." Harper let out a short, sharp, incredulous laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "That was years ago. It's expired. It's completely unenforceable." She looked at me with a flash of her old contempt, as if I had made a rookie mistake. I said nothing. I simply reached into my portfolio again and retrieved a second document. This one was a single, crisp white page. I slid it across the table to rest directly on top of the first. It was an addendum, a one-page extension to her original contract. It renewed the non-compete clause for another 24 months. It was dated 1 year ago. At the bottom, in clean, black ink, was her own looping, confident signature. She had signed it as a routine part of her annual performance review, buried in a stack of standard HR paperwork, an update she had never bothered to read. The last sliver of fight seemed to drain out of her. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an ally, a lifeline. They landed on Gavin. He was her partner in this, the man she had done all of this for, the prize she was meant to win. But Gavin couldn't meet her gaze. He wasn't even looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the prenuptial agreement that still lay on the table in front of him, the document that had erased his fortune. His hands were resting on his knees, and I could see them trembling, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. He was a ghost at the table, a man already hollowed out by his own ruin, offering no comfort, no support, no escape. He was as lost as she was. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice so that only the two of them, the architects of this failure, could hear me. The words were not meant for the lawyers or the guards. They were meant only for them. "You two wanted to be together," I said softly, the words precise and sharp as a scalpel. "You have each other." I let that hang in the air for a beat. "And now, you have each other, with nothing." That was the line she could not cross. The truth of it, the sheer, naked totality of her loss, finally broke through her shock. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, undiluted rage. "You will regret this, Sloane," she hissed, her voice venomous. "I swear to God, you will regret this." The threat was empty, the final rattle of a dying snake. I didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, I glanced at my watch. The time was 4:03 p.m. The exact moment the wire transfer was scheduled to go through, as if on cue, my phone lit up with a final message from the bank. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. The reversal was complete. The $300,000, the first taste of their new life, had been clawed back and returned to its rightful owner. The final lock had clicked shut. "It's time to go, Ms. Vale," the security guard said, his voice still polite, but now with an edge of finality. He gestured toward the door. Arya's associates gathered the documents, the evidence, the contracts, their movements efficient and silent. Harper stood, her body rigid. She gave me one last look, a look of such concentrated hatred that it was almost a physical force. Then, she turned and walked, her head held high in a last pathetic performance of defiance, out of the boardroom. The security guard followed her. We all watched in silence as she walked to the elevator bank. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing an empty, silver-walled car. She stepped inside, a solitary figure in a cage of her own making. She did not look back. The elevator doors slid shut, their polished steel surfaces meeting with a quiet, definitive thud that sealed her away from me, and from the company. Forever. Gavin was left behind in the glass cage of the boardroom. A king deposed in his own throne room, left to be dealt with by the lawyers. My work there was done. But the final act of this play could not take place in a private, soundproofed room. It had to happen in the open, in the heart of the company itself. I had my assistant send a single company-wide message, mandatory all-hands meeting, main lobby, 5 minutes. The grand atrium of the Rivendell Exchange was designed to impress. It was a cavern of Italian marble and brushed steel, 3 stories high, with a glass ceiling that flooded the space with a cold, unforgiving light. It was a public space, a corporate cathedral, and as the employees filed in from their various departments, their anxious whispers echoed in the vast emptiness. They came from accounting, from logistics, from marketing, from the distribution floor. Their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Rumors had been spreading all afternoon, a wildfire of uncertainty. They gathered in a wide, silent semicircle, a congregation waiting for a sermon they feared would be their last rites. I walked out onto the mezzanine balcony that overlooked the lobby, Elias Vance and the rest of my senior leadership team a step behind me. I did not go to the podium. I simply stood at the glass railing, my hands resting lightly on its cool surface, looking down at the sea of faces that represented the true assets of Thorne and Wilder Goods. The murmuring died. 150 people stared up at me, their collective breath held. They were expecting to hear about a sale. They were expecting to be told their jobs were gone, their futures uncertain. They were bracing for the end. I let the silence stretch, letting their fear coalesce into a single, palpable thing in the air between us. Then, I spoke. My voice, unamplified, was clear and steady in the atrium's acoustics. "There is no sale today," I said. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. A few people exchanged confused glances. "There was an attempt to force one," I continued, my gaze sweeping across them. "An attempt to devalue this company and sell it for parts. That attempt has failed." I let that sink in before delivering the final, definitive statement. Today is not about selling. Today is about keeping. I told them everything, not the sordid personal details, but the operational facts. I told them about the fraudulent invoices, the ghost warehouse, the shell corporation. I presented it not as a story of betrayal, but as a hostile attack on the company, an attack on them, on their work, on their security. I was not a wife scorned. I was a commander reporting on a battle we had just won. To ensure the stability of this company and protect it from any further attacks, I announced, I have, this afternoon, activated 2 key governance clauses. The first is a technical founder provision that consolidates all operational control of our systems. The second is a controlling interest transfer, executed through my marital agreement. The legal jargon was complex, but the meaning was simple, and I made sure they understood it. Effective immediately, and for the foreseeable future, all governing shares and executive authority of Thorne and Wilder Goods are vested solely with me. As I spoke, their phones and computers all pinged with a new email. It was from the legal department. It was a press release, sent to them at the same moment it went out to the wire services. The statement was a masterpiece of corporate non-disclosure. It spoke of an internal restructuring and the departure of co-founder Gavin Wilder. It stated that the company was cooperating fully with regulatory bodies to resolve certain financial discrepancies, and, most importantly, that its commitment to its employees, partners, and customers remains its highest and unwavering priority. It was a shield, a wall of legalese to protect them from the fallout. Simultaneously, a second email, this one from my own office, was sent to every supplier, vendor, and retail partner in our network. The message was just as direct. To all Thorne and Wilder partners, it read, please be advised of an immediate change in our executive leadership. All existing contracts will be honored. All supply chain operations will continue without interruption. Effective immediately. All payment authorizations and strategic communications must be routed through the office of the COO, Sloan Whitaker. New verification protocols will be in place by end of business today. It was a clean, decisive cut, severing all of Gavin's external lines of power and reassuring our partners that the machine was still running, just with a different engineer at the controls. I looked up from the crowd to the far wall of the atrium. The massive steel Thorne and Wilder logo mounted there caught the white light from the ceiling. For years, I had seen it as a symbol of our partnership. Now, it looked different. It looked like a single, unblinking eye, cold, clear, and watchful. My speech was over. I had laid out the facts, secured the perimeter, and charted the immediate course forward. As I turned from the railing, I saw him. Gavin was standing at the edge of the mezzanine, having been escorted down from the boardroom by security. He was no longer a part of my leadership team behind me. He was just an observer, an outsider. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a kind of dazed, desperate appeal. His lips moved, but the words were barely audible, a pathetic rasp swallowed by the vast space. Sloan, I'm sorry. The apology of a man who was only sorry he got caught. The plea of a man who had lost everything and wanted some small piece of it back. I looked at him, the man I had married, the partner who had stood beside me, and I felt a profound and complete absence of emotion. He was just a loose end, a final piece of old business to be filed away. I turned my gaze back to the employees still looking up at me from the lobby floor. My employees, my company. This is a company for the people who are still here after closing time, I said, my voice ringing with a finality that was not for him, but for them. It was a new mission statement, a declaration that the future belonged to those who were willing to work for it, to protect it. A sound started from the floor below. It wasn't the loud, chaotic cheer of a victory celebration. It was slow, steady, and rhythmic. It was the sound of hands clapping. It started with a few people in logistics, then spread to accounting, then to the marketing team. It was not a boisterous noise. It was heavy, deliberate, and uniform. the sound of 150 people making a choice. It was the sound of an oath, a pledge of allegiance to the company that remained, to the leader who had stayed. I gave them a single, brief nod of acknowledgement. Then, without a backward glance at Gavin, I turned and walked away from the railing, my heels clicking with sharp precision on the marble floor. I walked past my senior team, past the security guards, to the elevator bank at the far end of the mezzanine. I pressed the call button. The doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the 19th floor. The legal department. There were still documents to sign, filings to be made. The battle was over. But the work of rebuilding the kingdom was just beginning. The doors slid silently shut. The elevator ascended in silence, a rising steel and glass capsule lifting me away from the noise of the atrium floor. The applause had been a strange, foreign sound, a wave of human emotion in a day that had been governed by data and legal statutes. It was not a sound I had sought, but it was one I accepted. It was the sound of a company choosing to survive. The 19th floor was the quietest in the building. It was the domain of the legal department, a place of contracts and consequences, where the passionate, messy business of creation was translated into the cold, immutable language of the law. Arya was waiting for me in her corner office, a room with the same sweeping views as the boardroom below, but without any of the pretense. There was no mahogany table here, only functional steel desks, shelves groaning with legal binders, and the quiet hum of a document server. She had a single document laid out on her desk, its pages perfectly aligned. It was the finalized amendment to the corporate charter, reflecting the complete transfer of equity, the new capitalization table. It was the VE Day Treaty after the war, the formal declaration of a new world order. "It's done," Arya said, her voice holding the quiet satisfaction of a complex problem solved. "All notarized and filed electronically with the Secretary of State. This is the final signatory copy for the corporate records." She slid the document and a pen toward me. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, the kind men like Gavin used to sign deals that ruined other people. I picked it up. Its weight felt alien in my hand, a tool of a world I had fought against. I placed it back on the desk and took out my own pen from my jacket pocket. It was a simple, fine-tipped gel pen, a tool for marking up logistics charts and making notes in the margins of contracts, a tool for work. I signed my name on the line at the bottom of the page. The stroke was fluid, unwavering, a straight, clean line of black ink. It was not the signature of a victor. It was the signature of an operator closing out a work order. The task was complete. As I capped my pen, my phone, which I had placed face down on the desk, vibrated against the wood. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message from Gavin. The preview on the locked screen showed only 2 words. "Please, talk." For a single, fleeting moment, I felt a ghost of an echo of the woman I had been that morning, the wife, the partner, the part of the we he had spoken of. The message was a pathetic, desperate reach across the chasm that had opened between us, a plea from the bottom of the rubble. He wasn't asking for the company back. He was asking for an audience, for a chance to re-engage, to explain, to manage the narrative of his own destruction. I looked at the 2 words on the screen. Then, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone, and the screen went dark. I did not delete the message. I did not block his number. I simply turned off the notification. It was an irrelevant piece of data, a signal from a system that had already been decommissioned. I stood and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city below. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across Rivendell Exchange. My reflection floated in the glass, a transparent ghost superimposed over the grid of the streets. My face was pale, my expression unreadable. There was no flush of victory, no triumphant smile. The face staring back at me was not that of a queen who had seized a throne. It was the face of an engineer who had just survived a catastrophic system failure and was now calculating the necessary steps to get the machine back to 100% efficiency. The operator was back online. Arya began to gather the other documents into a new, clean binder labeled Corporate Governance, Q4 Restructure. My work here was done. I walked back to my temporary station at one of the empty desks and opened my laptop. The machine whirred to life, my digital world reforming on the screen. I ignored the flood of emails from concerned partners and congratulatory board members. I navigated instead to a folder deep within my personal drive, a folder simply labeled Family. It contained only a handful of images, scanned photos of my mother, a few of my father, and the wedding photos. I clicked on one. It was the perfect shot, the one that had been featured in a local magazine. Gavin and I were standing in the conservatory at Glenmere Hall, bathed in that deceptively golden light. He was smiling, his arm around my waist, the picture of the proud, successful husband. I was smiling too, a carefully calibrated expression of bridal joy. We looked like a prospectus for a happy marriage, a glossy ad for a life I now knew was a shell corporation. My cursor hovered over the file. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel anger. I felt the quiet, clean necessity of a system purge. The data was obsolete. It was corrupting the archives. I clicked the file, dragged its icon across the desktop to the small icon of a trash can, and released. An animation showed the picture crumpling before it disappeared. Then, I right-clicked on the trash can. From the drop-down menu, I selected Empty Trash. A small dialog box appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item? I clicked Yes. Somewhere far below, on the streets of Rivingale, the siren of an ambulance blared to life, a brief, urgent wail that cut through the afternoon air and then faded just as quickly. A momentary crisis in the life of a single, anonymous person. The city, in its vast, relentless indifference, continued to move. Cars flowed through the intersections. People walked along the sidewalks. The drama that had consumed my life, that had felt so total and all-encompassing, hadn't even registered as a tremor on the city's Richter scale. The world had not stopped. I opened my email client. I composed a new message, addressing it to our master distribution list of all partners, vendors, and clients. The subject line was concise, a message from Thorne and Wilder. The body of the email contained only a single sentence. Thorne and Wilder is still here and stronger. I hit send. The message flew out into the world, a digital declaration of resilience. It was the only story that mattered now. I closed the laptop and stood up. The legal office was quiet. The day's work done. Arya gave me a small, respectful nod from her desk. I walked to the door and paused. My hand on the light switch. I flicked it down. The overhead lights went out, plunging the room into the deep, cool shadows of the late afternoon. The only light remaining was the small, steady, crimson glow from the power button on the industrial printer in the corner. A single, robotic eye in the darkness. It was a full stop. The end of a chapter. I stepped out of the room and pulled the heavy door closed behind me. It clicked shut with a solid, definitive sound. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know your thoughts. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the story and help it get heard by more people, please hit that hype button. It makes a huge difference.